advance of the places and full organizational, and Lynn and Eve and Alan for hosting. And a special thanks to Mike O'Malley, standing back there, who made it up from New Haven, my editor from Yale, who actually took a flyer on this project when I went down to see him at the Yale booth at double ALS. I'm like, I've got an idea for a book. And he's like, okay. And of course, to my colleagues and friends, all of you who are here and who have all through the years, I'm like, what do you think about this? And how am I for that? And how am I going to talk about this? And so you have all helped me, and this book would not have been anything of what it is without all of your help. And of course, to my family, whose love and support not only make this possible, but of course make life worth living. So with those things, I want to just talk for a few minutes. And what I want to talk about is a little bit about this journey that led me to this project, what got me started, and what I found along the way. Because a number of you here have known me for quite a long time. I think Waldo Fielding, you probably win the record on this one, knew me from when I was in utero.
But I paid for the book, too.
What's that?
Just one sure I paid for the book.
Yeah, right.
When he said Newton's heart, he could have left out the word author.
You know? In any event, some of you have known me long, some of you have known me short, but all of you might wonder, like, what kind of person writes a book like this? And, you know, you take a look at my bookcase, you see things like The Grim Reader, you know, Stiff, Life After Death, my favorite, Death After Death. And you probably think that, you know, that the person inhabiting the office was some perverse combination of Hannibal Lecter and Woody Allen. What got me, however, what I hope you're going to find is what I found, which is that this project is anything but dead, and it really does engage some really fundamental questions. So what got me started on this project is because, as many of you know, I teach trust and estates and estate planning, which are all courses about dead people and property. And the principle, if you've never been to law school, this is the thing that gets you through. The principle is freedom of testation, the fact that people can control their property after death. That's the big American principle, and it sort of serves as that underlying principle in all that great fiction about, you know, Cat in the Hot Tin Roof and all sorts of things. It's the dead person controlling the property and how that does, how important that is as a value. I also noticed all this discussion about the estate tax and how effective the death tax rhetoric was. You know, when we say the death tax, that really bothers people for some reason. And I thought, well, why would it bother them? Because after all, you're dead. Like, why would you care? And I came to realize that, in fact, the reason that freedom of testation is really important to us, and the reason that the death tax is really threatening to us, is because the ability to control property after death affords us this little bit of immortality. It's a little bit like a consolation prize. You know, you might be dead, but don't worry, we're going to be at least respecting your wishes. And so that caused me to want to think about, well, what about other interests of the dead, and how does the law treat it? How does the law treat your ability to control your body and your property and your reputation and your secrets? Like, what does the law do with all of this? So I began, and I made this proposal to Mike that I was going to do a book that had one chapter on the law of the dead, and then the rest of the chapters of the book was going to be insights from philosophy. What do philosophers tell us about, you know, why we give these rights? And from then psychology, and then sociology, and then religion. Remember that great book you were going to get, Mike? And I set out to write the book, and I began with the section about controlling our body. And what I thought it was going to be was about 2 paragraphs. And it was going to say something like, although we can leave instructions, they're not always enforced. And then I was going to like try to stretch them out and maybe get a case cite or something. And I turned to that venerable, the equivalent of the World Book or the Encyclopedia Britannica for lawyers, the ALR. It's a really sort of an embarrassing source. But I thought that's where I'll get the law. And I got myself started. Well, what happened was, 67 pages later, through subjects like grave robbery, as Andrew mentioned, rioting at medical schools, The story of Jean-Jacques Winslow. He was the 18th century French scientist who devoted his life to coming up with a surgical definition of when death occurred. He came by his interest honestly because as a child he had been twice left for dead and woke up in a coffin. Then I looked at questions of organ transplants and contemporary issues involving such things as exhuming sperm from dead men. Who knew that that could be done? For posthumous procreation. And the body of Ted Williams being cryonically preserved in Arizona. And I realized, as I say, 67 pages later, that the story and the subject was a lot richer than I'd ever imagined. And as I turned to each subsequent subject, controlling property, committing property to charitable and other purposes, I found the same thing. In each section there were these incredible stories. I'll just give you two. One is, for example, many people know what Alfred Nobel did for business. Alfred, anybody?
Dynamite.
Dynamite, the inventor of dynamite, okay? And, but I don't know whether you know this, which is that Nobel's brother was killed in an accident, a factory accident. And the newspaper, communication wasn't so great at the time, and the newspaper got the mistaken report that Alfred Nobel had died. And they published an obituary of Alfred Nobel. So he's living and he wakes up, he opens the paper, and there's the obituary. He's like, wow, what do they say about me? Well, here's what they say. The merchant of death is dead. That's not a great start. Then it continues on. Dr. Alfred Nobel, who became rich by finding ways to kill more people faster than ever before, died yesterday. Okay. I think it's no small wonder that shortly after this story was published, Alfred Nobel rewrote his will to devote the bulk of his estate to fund the Nobel Prize, thereby effectively tying his name with the most respected individuals of each generation. Okay? There were also incredible stories about the rights of publicity. Those are the ability to control your reputation as a commercial asset. Well, I had known a little bit about that it was a property interest and you could control it. But what I didn't know is that there's a little company, a not so little company in Indiana, called CMG Worldwide, which owns the rights of publicity of over 200 people, okay, including people like, Betty Davis and Humphrey Bogart, like some of the naturals you think, right? But they also own people like Frank Lloyd Wright, Malcolm X, Rosa Parks, Lou Gehrig, even Jack Kerouac. I think he's sort of a hip fellow, right? No, he's owned by a corporation in Indiana. And it's sort of incredible to think that this whole business is going on of marketing individual identities. Even more than the fun stories, I found two things that I hadn't realized. And the first is that although death is universal, the law governing death is anything but. And indeed, it's really highly regional about how different parts of the world treat interests of the dead. And so different countries take very different positions regarding the ability to control one's body, property, or reputation. And we can tell a lot about a country by seeing which interests they protect. So, for example, in comparing rights between the owner of art and the creator of art, it's not surprising that France, a culture that is steeped in art, gives the posthumous rights to the artist, while the United States, you guessed it, gives it to the property owner. The second thing that I realized in this study is how the American law of death has changed over time. And really what's happened is that there has been this tremendous growth in the rights of the dead. And we've been granting more and more rights to the dead, and we've been squeezing out rights of the living. Now you might be wondering, like, who's agitating for these rights, right? They tend to be a rather silent group, the dead. Really large. But spoiler alert, it's the banking interests, the corporations that are using the dead as a decoy to expand these rights of the dead. And the problem is that this trend has been, we have allowed this trend to occur in part because of the success of our founders, who were very interested in having a country that was free of dead hand control. right? But they were so successful that we, growing up, don't really realize what a drag it is to have our land controlled by the dead. So we think, like, great idea. Let's give more rights to the dead, particularly as all of us are getting older. It certainly sounds more and more appealing. However, it really does impose lots of costs on the living, which I hope you'll see when you read the book. And I hope that you'll also join me in trying to restore the balance, because I feel that our legacy depends on it. So anyway, that's it for my comments, and I really, am I supposed to take questions or not? No. No. Excellent.